My daughter died 6 weeks ago, but 3 days after her funeral, her storage unit in Burnaby sent me an automated email saying her account was past due. The unit was in her name. She had never mentioned it to me once. I paid the $32 and drove there the next morning. I want to tell you what I found inside, but first I need to tell you about my son-in-law. My name is Hugh Calloway. I'm 64 years old and I live in New Westminster, British Columbia, about 20 minutes east of Vancouver, in the house my wife and I bought in 1991. My wife passed in 2017. After that, it was just me and the occasional weekend when my daughter would drive over from her condo in Burnaby, and we'd eat bad takeout and watch whatever British procedural she was obsessed with that month. She had her mother's laugh. She had her mother's way of going very quiet when something was wrong. I spent 33 years as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm in downtown Vancouver. Not glamorous work. You sit with spreadsheets and you look for the number that doesn't belong, the transfer that happens at 2 a.m., the invoice with a vendor nobody can find. People think forensic accounting is exciting because of what it reveals. It isn't. It's patient, tedious, methodical work. And the revelation only comes after you've been staring at columns long enough that your eyes feel like sandpaper. You develop a tolerance for that kind of slow attention. You also develop a very specific intolerance for numbers that lie. I retired in 2021. I thought that particular patience was behind me. My daughter was 38 when she died. Pulmonary embolism, the death certificate said. She was healthy. Ran the seawall 2 or 3 times a week. Didn't drink, didn't smoke, watched what she ate with the focused dedication of someone who had lost her mother to a stroke at 61 and wasn't planning to repeat the experience. The kind of death that arrives without warning and leaves you standing in a hospital hallway at 11 at night, wondering what you missed and whether there's any version of missing it that you can live with. She married her husband 4 years ago. I need to tell you about him before I tell you what was in that storage unit. She met him at a real estate investment seminar in Richmond. That should have been my first indicator. But I gave him the benefit of the doubt because my daughter was happy, and I understood that my job was no longer to screen her decisions. He was 45, presentable, with the practiced ease of someone who had learned early that confidence reads as competence if you don't look too closely. He had a stepson from a previous relationship, 23, who moved into my daughter's condo in Burnaby 6 months after the wedding. The stepson's stated plan was to complete his online business certification. That was 2 years ago. His business, as far as I observed, consisted of sitting at the kitchen island with noise-canceling headphones and occasionally asking his stepfather to transfer him money for courses. He called me the old man. Not directly, but my daughter's condo had thin walls in a particular way of carrying voices or on corners, and I had spent 3 decades learning to notice what people think isn't being noticed. I filed it away. That's a habit that doesn't retire with you. The funeral was on a Friday. 41 people came. My son-in-law stood at the front with the precise composure of someone whose grief had been carefully arranged before he left the house. His stepson stood half a step behind him the whole time, just far enough back that photographs would make it look like respectful distance rather than disengagement. I noticed things. Afterward, people came back to the condo. My brother-in-law drove in from Kelowna, stayed 3 hours, left before dinner. After everyone else had trickled out, I was the last one there, standing in my daughter's kitchen in the particular silence that only exists when too many people have recently left a room. My son-in-law was on his phone within 15 minutes, standing by the window, voice low, one hand flipping through the stack of mail on the counter. He pulled an envelope out, read the return address, and looked up. He hadn't realized I was still in the kitchen. He put it back with the smoothness of someone who has practiced returning things to where they were. His expression shifted into grief so quickly I nearly questioned what I'd seen. Nearly. The stepson went upstairs. Within 10 minutes, his music was at a volume that I can only describe as deliberate, not background noise. The kind that means the house belongs to whoever is most comfortable in it, and he was comfortable. My daughter had been in the ground for 6 hours. I made tea. I stood at the counter and looked at the coffee maker she'd had since university, the one she'd moved with her to every apartment. And I thought, something is wrong here. I didn't know the shape of it yet, but 33 years of finding the number that doesn't belong told me to start paying attention. I drank the tea and said goodnight and drove back to New Westminster on the Alex Fraser Bridge with both hands on the wheel and one thought sitting very quietly in the back of my mind, the way thoughts do when they're waiting for you to have time for them. The storage unit email came 3 days later. I paid the $32 1 month overdue and drove to the facility in East Burnaby, a place called Secure Space Self-Storage on Weyburn Drive, the kind of industrial building with keypad entry and fluorescent lighting that hums just slightly off. A young woman at the front desk, very professional, said she was sorry for my loss. The account had been in my daughter's name since 2022. Unit 114, ground floor, around the back. She had never mentioned it. The unit was small, maybe 5 by 8 feet, mostly plastic bins, the kind you get at Canadian Tire, labeled in her handwriting, winter clothes, kitchen extras, photos. But in the front, right where you'd see it when you opened the door, was a single cardboard banker's box, on the lid in black marker. Dad. That's all, just Dad. I sat on the floor of that storage unit on a Tuesday morning with a box in my lap that my daughter had left there for reasons she apparently hadn't gotten around to explaining to me. And I understood, the way you understand things when the room is very quiet and your chest is very heavy, that she had known something. I opened the box. On top was a USB drive, the small kind, blue with a piece of masking tape along the side. In her handwriting, play this first. Underneath it, a folder, yellow, thick. Underneath the folder, a sealed envelope with my name on it. I put the USB drive in my jacket pocket. I took the box to my car. I drove home to New Westminster and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and the specific silence of a house that has been empty for 7 years and has never quite stopped being empty regardless. I plugged in the drive. A single audio file, timestamp on the file 14 weeks before she died. Her voice came through my laptop speakers, and I had to stop it after 4 seconds and sit there for a moment, because I hadn't heard her voice since the hospital, and I wasn't prepared for that. I pressed play again. Kitchen sounds in the background. Her kitchen. I recognized the particular hiss of her espresso machine, the one she'd gotten on sale at Williams-Sonoma. Her voice, clear, describing what she found. Not upset exactly, measured the way she got when she was trying to think something through. She sounded like me, which made it harder. She described 3 transfers from her personal savings account at TD Bank, each one in the range of $7,000, each one made from the bank's mobile app between midnight and 2 in the morning over the previous 6 months. She hadn't made any of them. She had checked the IP address history through TD's online portal, something you can do. Most people don't know, and each login had come from a device that wasn't her phone or her laptop. Then her husband's voice. I recognized it instantly. Low, steady, with that particular flatness he always had when he wasn't performing for anyone. He was in another room, phone to his ear. She had left her phone on the counter recording. He said, "The life insurance is the clean part. The investment accounts are trickier because of how they're registered. Tell him we need the beneficiary change done before the end of the quarter." She doesn't look at those statements. But pause. Then she won't find it. She thinks I don't know how to use her laptop. I turned off the audio. I sat at the kitchen table in New Westminster and looked at the wall where my wife's photo has been since 2017, and I breathed, the way you breathe when you need to keep your hands from shaking. She had known. She had been building this, quietly, alone, for weeks at minimum. And she had not called me. I have thought about that every day since. I don't know whether she was protecting me or protecting herself from having to say it out loud. I don't know whether she thought she had more time. What I know is that she left me a box with Dad on the lid and a storage unit she'd been paying $32 a month for because she needed somewhere that wasn't the condo where someone might find it. She trusted me to know what to do with it. I opened the yellow folder. 40 pages of printed documents. Bank statements. TD in a second account at a credit union in Coquitlam I'd never heard her mention. A printed page from the Canada Life website showing the beneficiary designation on a $200,000 life insurance policy she'd held since 2009. The named beneficiary had been changed to her husband in August of the previous year. The original designation, which I found in the folder behind it, was my name. The policy had been updated through an online portal. The last document in the folder was a printed email chain, her email address and an address I didn't recognize. A financial planner with a name I noted carefully. 2 months before she died. Subject line: estate planning follow-up. The planner was asking about updating registered accounts to reflect the current beneficiary structure. Her husband's name appeared 3 times. Her name appeared once as the account holder. She had not initiated that email chain. It had been forwarded to her account from her husband's. I sat with the folder for a long time, then I opened her letter. She had written it by hand, 3 pages, on the pale blue stationery she'd had since she was a teenager. She wrote clearly and without drama, which was so completely her that it made the whole thing worse. She said she didn't know what to do yet, but she wanted someone she trusted to have the information regardless. She said she was sorry she hadn't told me in person. She said she'd been trying to find a way to say it that didn't sound like something out of a bad movie. She said she knew I would know what to look for. She was right. Before I subscribe to the channel, please take a moment to drop a comment with the time where you are right now. I'd love to know who's listening. I called a lawyer the next morning. I searched estate and probate litigation, Vancouver, BC, on my phone, and the second result was a firm on West Georgia Street, a woman named Priya Mehta, who was described by one reviewer as someone you want beside you in a fight, not across from you. I called at 8:45. The message said the office opened at 9. I called again at 9:01. A person answered. I explained the situation in the time it took to drive from New Westminster to the parking garage on Thurlow Street. Priya Mehta was in her early 50s, with the particular stillness of someone who has heard many variations of this story and reserves her energy for the parts that require it. I put the USB drive and the folder on the table. I put the letter beside it. She read for 11 minutes. I watched her hands. She has very good hands for a lawyer. They give nothing away. She set down the letter. She said, "Has he started moving on the estate?" "Not yet." She tapped her pen on the legal pad. "Give it a week. These things move quickly when someone is motivated." She told me to change nothing in the condo, to remove nothing, to not ask him to leave and not indicate that I knew anything. Comfortable people get sloppy, she said. That's true everywhere, and it's especially true in estate disputes. She referred me to a CPA named Grant Thiessen, who did forensic financial work out of an office on Robson. Calm, thorough, no wasted words. I thought it was worth noting, that description. I drove back to New Westminster with a clearer head than I'd had all week. The next morning, I called Grant Thiessen's office. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop on Robson Street, because his office was being repainted, and he seemed the kind of man who adapted without complaint. Lean, late 40s, the kind of precise that isn't fussy. He asked me to describe the transfers in my daughter's account, and I did so without a document in front of me. From memory, because that's the way my mind stores numbers. He said, "Can you get me the account statements?" I already had them. He looked at the folder. "Where'd you come by these?" My daughter kept copies in a storage unit on my property. He turned the page. Sufficient. While Grant worked, I did exactly what Priya had told me to do. I visited the condo twice that week, as I had been doing every week since the funeral. I was present, quiet, unremarkable. My son-in-law performed the role of grieving widower with the discipline of someone who had practiced it. The stepson brought people over on a Thursday night that started at 9 and ended somewhere after midnight. I noted it in the small notebook I'd started keeping in my shirt pocket, because 33 years of forensic habit does not politely step aside when you retire. On the 6th day, my son-in-law left a note on the kitchen counter, which I found when I came to water my daughter's plants. Handwritten on a notepad with a real estate company's logo on the top, it explained, with careful sympathy, that it might be beneficial for both of us to discuss the practical arrangements around the condo, which was, after all, his primary residence. Near the bottom, almost incidental, was a line about how the estate process could take a toll on everyone involved, particularly those with elevated stress, and that he hoped we could proceed in a way that prioritized my health and well-being. I read it twice. I took a photograph of it with my phone. I put the note in a folder I had labeled with a date and a letter A. Grant called me on the 10th day. We met at the same coffee shop. He put a 14-page report on the table and walked me through it without preamble. The transfers from my daughter's TD savings account totaled $22,300. 8 transfers, all between midnight and 2 in the morning, all made from the mobile banking app. The forensic trace, done through documentation I had provided and information available through the estate's legal proceedings, showed the login IP addresses for 7 of the 8 transfers matched a device registered to the stepson. Not my son-in-law's phone. His stepson's. The boy had been sitting in my daughter's condo, in the apartment she'd paid for, and using his own phone to move her money into a separate account at midnight while she slept. Grant turned to page 7. There's more. The Canada Life beneficiary change in August that was processed through the online portal from the same device. I sat with that for a moment. My daughter had been writing careful notes on her phone about transfers she couldn't explain, recording conversations she was afraid to have in person, paying $32 a month for a storage unit where she could keep evidence that no one in her house would find. She had been doing all of this alone. I had been 20 minutes away on the Alex Fraser Bridge, restoring vintage radios in my basement workshop and giving her space because I thought space was what she needed. I brought everything to Priya that afternoon. She read Grant's report for 12 minutes. When she looked up, her expression was the same it always was, focused accessory. She filed for a financial audit of the estate accounts through BC Supreme Court the following week and notified Canada Life in writing through her office that the estate was under legal review. Any beneficiary change process in the 12 months preceding death was to be flagged pending investigation. She said he'll try to access the TFSA and the RSP next. Both were registered in your daughter's name alone, and the beneficiary designations matter. Has he been to the financial institutions? Not yet. Good. The audit motion establishes grounds for a temporary freeze. It won't hold indefinitely, but it buys us time. She looked at me across the desk. Mr. Calloway, you should know. This is going to take several months. You're going to be in that condo visiting his home for the duration. I know. Are you all right with that? I thought about my daughter's storage unit, $32 a month. The box with that on the lid, the USB drive in the yellow folder, and 3 pages of blue stationery. The work she had done, alone, quietly, not knowing she had until February. I said, I've done longer work on less. 2 weeks after the audit was filed, Priya called to tell me my son-in-law had filed a notice of contestation. Grounds, he was the surviving spouse and entitled to a preferential share of the estate under BC's Wills, Estates and Succession Act. He was also challenging the validity of my daughter's will on the basis that it had been prepared, he claimed, under my undue influence. I sat in the car outside a Safeway in New Westminster and looked at the steering wheel. His lawyer was a man whose name I didn't recognize from any referral, which told me he had found someone inexpensive. The filing had mistakes in it that Priya spent about 30 seconds identifying on the phone. But it was filed, it was real, and it meant that my son-in-law still believed he had the better hand. Comfortable people, Priya had said. I went back to my basement workshop. My wife had found the radio restoration hobby for me after I retired. She said I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't a spreadsheet. I had a 1958 RCA Victor tabletop radio on the bench, the kind with a Bakelite cabinet and a cloth grill that I'd been working on for 3 weeks. The capacitors had been failing one by one over 60 years, and it needed the whole capacitor board replaced. The work is fine, meticulous. You take out what's degraded and you put in what belongs. It doesn't look like much is happening until the moment the thing runs. I picked up the soldering iron. I thought about December. I thought about the 4 years I'd had with a man living inside my daughter's life, and I kept looking for the moments where I should have seen something and said something, and I couldn't find them cleanly. That's the honest truth. I had given him the benefit of the doubt because my daughter was an adult who was allowed to choose badly, the same as any of us, and I had not wanted to be the difficult father-in-law who made her choose. She had chosen me anyway in the end. She'd left me a box with my name on it and trusted me to know what to do with it. I put the soldering iron down. I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. The forensic audit came back to Priya's office 5 weeks after filing. She called on a Wednesday and asked me to come in that afternoon. The report was 22 pages, Grant had done a second pass using documents we'd obtained through the court order, which included full transaction records from TD and the Coquitlam Credit Union account my daughter had flagged in her folder. The Coquitlam account had received the transferred funds. The account had been opened by the stepson in September of the year before. Grant had traced the subsequent movement of those funds. $11,000 went to a gaming site, $4,000 to a credit card in the stepson's name, the remainder withdrawn in cash. The money was gone, but the trail was clear and complete. There was a second finding. My daughter had held a registered retirement account, an RSP, valued at just over $91,000, accumulated over 16 years with contributions she'd made since her first job out of university. The original beneficiary, named in 2007, was her mother. After her mother died in 2017, she had updated it to her estate, which meant it would flow through the will. In March of the previous year, the beneficiary had been changed to her husband. The change had been processed through the financial institution's online portal. The IP address for that login matched the same device as everything else. The stepson had been the instrument. The husband had been the architect. I took Grant's report to the RCMP detachment in Burnaby the following morning, along with printed copies of the audio file transcript and the email chain from the storage unit folder. The officer I spoke with was a constable in her early 30s who listened carefully and asked precise questions, and at the end of the meeting said she would be forwarding the file to the Integrated Forensic Identification Services Unit. She said it would take time. She said that phrase in the way people say it when they mean it. I said I had time. I said that very specifically. 3 weeks later, Priya called me at 7:40 in the morning. She said RCMP had opened a formal criminal investigation into my daughter's death. Not a closure yet. An opening. They had requested her full medical file, the autopsy records, and had applied to a judge for authorization to exhume for a second toxicological examination. I was in the basement workshop when she called. The RCA Victor was finished and running on the bench beside me. I'd turned it on that morning for the first time, and it had come to life with the particular warm, crackling hiss of a 60-year-old signal finding its way through to the present. I had set it on CBC Radio 2, which was playing something orchestral that I didn't recognize but found steadying. I set the phone down on the workbench and looked at the wall. My daughter had described dizziness, had described fatigue that felt different from tired, had mentioned to me once in November, the last autumn of her life, that she'd been to her GP about some heart irregularity that the doctor thought was stress-related. The GP had recommended a follow-up with a cardiologist. She had not made that appointment. I had not pushed her on it. The toxicology results came back in just under 4 weeks. Priya called me on a Thursday morning. Her voice was quieter than usual. She said the second examination had found elevated concentrations of a cardiac glycoside in my daughter's tissue samples. Consistent with low-dose administration over an extended period, the medical examiner had noted, and inconsistent with any known supplement or medication in her file. The compound in question, if administered in small amounts over several months without the recipient's knowledge, is capable of causing exactly the kind of sudden cardiac event that had killed my healthy 38-year-old daughter on a Wednesday morning in March. She had written it down on her phone. Dizziness. Heart irregularity. Something wrong that felt different from stress. She had left those notes in the yellow folder, in the box with my name on the lid. Priya said, RCMP will be executing warrants this morning. The condo, the stepson's apartment in Metrotown, and the financial records beyond what the audit already covered. I sat in my kitchen in New Westminster and looked at the street through the window, the ordinary Tuesday street with the recycling bins out and the neighbor's dog going past, and the whole completely indifferent city continuing in the way it does. I said, should I do anything? She said, go about your morning. You've already done everything that needed doing. At 10:15, 2 unmarked RCMP vehicles parked on my daughter's street. I heard about it from Priya, not because I was there. My son-in-law's composure, which had held through 6 weeks of legal proceedings and careful performance, held for approximately 40 seconds after the officers introduced themselves, and then it didn't. The stepson, according to Priya's contact, said I didn't know 3 times in the first 4 minutes. By the end of that same day, he had retained his own lawyer and was discussing the terms of a cooperation agreement. Within 48 hours, he had given a complete statement to the RCMP. He confirmed the transfers. He confirmed the beneficiary changes. He confirmed his stepfather had directed him to make the changes, describing it as managing money for someone who was overwhelmed. He said he hadn't known about anything else. The RCMP investigator, based on her experience with the case, believed him. That fact sat with me for a long time. I'm not sure how I feel about it even now. The contestation hearing before the BC Supreme Court Registrar came 6 weeks later. My son-in-law had retained a new lawyer by then, a woman who specialized in estate litigation and had appeared in a Vancouver Sun article about a high-profile probate case the previous year. That told me two things. He understood the seriousness of his position, and he had access to money that wasn't in the accounts we'd already traced. The hearing was in a building on Robson Street that I had walked past approximately 400 times and never entered. I arrived 40 minutes early and sat with Priya in the second row. She had her documents arranged with the precision of someone who understood that every visible detail in a courtroom is also an argument. My son-in-law arrived with his lawyer. He sat at the opposing table and did not look at me. His posture was correct and uninformative. I gave him credit for that. It was a difficult morning to perform composure, and he was still performing it. The registrar was a man in his 60s with silver-rimmed glasses in the manner of someone who had heard every variation of family grief weaponized in a legal proceeding and found none of them surprising. The audio file was admitted into evidence under BC's Privacy Act after Priya established that my daughter had been a participant in the conversation, had initiated the recording, and had been present throughout. She submitted the storage unit receipt establishing chain of custody, the authentication of the handwriting on the USB packaging, and the signed acknowledgement from the secure space facility confirming the unit had been in my daughter's name and that I had accessed it using the PIN she had registered on the account. When the audio played through the courtroom speakers, I heard my daughter's kitchen for the first time since the day she died. The espresso machine hiss. Her husband's voice, flat and certain, talking about beneficiary changes. She doesn't look at those statements, and my daughter breathing quietly somewhere nearby, holding her phone to record a conversation she wasn't part of, in her own kitchen, because she had already understood. My son-in-law sat without visible movement through the entire 37 seconds. The will was upheld. The contestation was dismissed. The condo at the address I had visited every Sunday for 4 years was declared part of the estate. The RRSP, the TFSA, the investment accounts she had been building since she was 22, all of it stood as she had intended it to stand, with me as executor and primary beneficiary. The $22,300 was ordered returned as fraudulently obtained through civil recovery. The RCMP investigation remained open and was proceeding separately. On the way out of the building on Robson Street, my son-in-law caught up to me in the corridor. He was still controlled. I'll give him that. He said something about how I had misunderstood his intentions from the beginning, how he had loved my daughter, how none of this was what it looked like. I had heard that sentence in various forms for 33 years. Not once had it ever been true when delivered in a courthouse corridor by someone whose lawyer had just lost. I looked at him and said, I know what the numbers mean. I always have. I walked to the elevator. He didn't follow. The formal charges came through Priya 6 weeks later. My son-in-law was charged with criminal fraud over $5,000 and breach of fiduciary duty. His stepson, under the terms of the cooperation agreement, received a conditional discharge with 4 years of probation and full restitution obligations of $22,300. His stepfather's charges were separate and ongoing. The Canada Life investigation into the beneficiary change was handled by their internal compliance team and referred to the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada. Priya was confident about the direction that would go. The math, as it stood, the will upheld. The RRSP and TFSA proceeding to the estate. The condo and investment accounts intact. The insurance matter moving slowly, but moving correctly. Nothing recovered that made up for anything. But everything standing as my daughter had meant for it to stand. 2 months after the hearing, I finished the second radio in the workshop. A 1961 Westinghouse tabletop, cherry cabinet, found at an estate sale in Maple Ridge. The tuning dial had been frozen for decades from oxidation on the variable capacitor, which is a painstaking thing to restore because you're working on something designed to move with near zero friction, and any force applied incorrectly will damage it permanently. You have to work slowly, with solvents, in stages, until it turns. I set it on the shelf beside the RCA Victor, 2 radios running that had not rung before. I had gone through the last of the banker's box a few weeks prior, working through the folder documents one more time to verify everything Priya had needed. At the bottom, beneath the printed statements in the email chains, was a small photograph tucked into the back of the yellow folder, printed on regular paper, the way you do when you just want to keep a copy of something. The 2 of us at Long Beach on Vancouver Island, 3 summers ago. She was squinting into the sun, which was low and coming off the Pacific, at that particular angle it gets in August. She had found a piece of sea glass and was holding it up to show the camera. It was pale green, and the light came through it, and she was grinning. I didn't remember who had taken the photo. Probably someone we'd asked on the beach. I put it on the shelf above the workbench, propped against the bakelite cabinet of the RCA Victor. My daughter holding a piece of sea glass on a beach in August, grinning at whoever was holding the camera. That's a reasonable thing to have on a shelf. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And for the next story, the box is on the right. There's a photograph on my workbench shelf now, propped against the bakelite radio cabinet. My daughter holding a piece of sea glass up to the August light at Long Beach, squinting into the sun, grinning. I don't know who took it. Somebody on the beach. Neither of us thought it mattered at the time. I think about that photograph a lot. I think about what it takes for a person to know something is wrong, to be afraid, to be living inside a situation they don't fully understand yet, and still to sit down quietly and begin documenting it, to pay $32 a month for a storage unit, to put a USB drive in a box and write her father's name on the lid and trust that he would know what to do when the time came. She was right that I would know. But I want to be honest about something. Knowing what to do with evidence is not the same as having done enough. I have spent a lot of nights in that workshop asking myself whether I missed things I should have caught, whether I gave her husband too much benefit of the doubt, too much of what I told myself was respect for her choices. I don't have a clean answer. What I have is the understanding that the instinct to look away from something uncomfortable, to call it someone else's business, to wait and see, that instinct has a cost. It's a cost I'll carry. What my daughter did in those final months was not small. She didn't have 33 years of forensic accounting behind her. She didn't know the law, didn't know what would be admissible, didn't know whether any of it would matter. She just knew that something was wrong, and she started writing it down anyway. She asked questions of her bank that most people don't know they're allowed to ask. She kept records. She found a storage unit nobody would think to look in. That's not something most people do when they're frightened. Most people hope the problem resolves itself. She didn't hope, she worked. I've thought a lot about what separates the people who get through genuinely difficult things from the people who don't. It isn't luck, mostly. It's something closer to a refusal to let fear be the final word, a refusal to stop thinking clearly when clarity is hardest to hold on to. My daughter had that. She had it in a way I recognized because I had watched her build it over 38 years, the same way you build anything that lasts. Slowly, with attention, without expecting credit for it. The men who came into her life and saw her careful, methodical nature as a weakness to exploit were wrong in the way that people are wrong when they mistake patience for passivity. They thought she wasn't watching. She was watching the whole time. She just needed someone to carry the folder after she couldn't. That's what I did. I carried the folder. And I think about what would have happened if she hadn't trusted me enough to leave it. If she'd been less precise, less thorough, less willing to do the work of documenting something that terrified her. The answer to that is one I don't linger on, because it doesn't have a good ending. What I know is this. The right thing, done carefully and documented honestly, holds up. It holds up in a lawyer's office on West Georgia Street, and it holds up in a BC Supreme Court hearing room, and it holds up in a medical examiner's report that nobody wanted to read. The truth has a particular durability when somebody has been meticulous enough to preserve it. I wind the RCA Victor on the shelf some mornings just to hear it run. 60-year-old signal finding its way through to the present. She would have liked that, I think. She would have liked that things that worked exactly as they should.